First of all, thanks everybody for joining. There were some really interesting talks at the same time. And if you haven't seen the talk with Brian and Lisa, I really suggest to watch it later. It's a very amazing talk. I have already attended that one in Workspace Amsterdam. But yeah. So my talk is about falling in love. That's the only thing that I can share. And there's two disclaimers that I want to mention. First of all, I'm going to quote a lot Daniel North with this CUPID idea. I have never checked it with him, so everything that I'm saying is my only understanding. That's the first one. Second is that when I actually was going through this talk and I was submitting the abstract in, I think, December, the word was different. And I will tell you how the word was different. In 2 months, everything has changed. So I changed something else. And on the way that I was coming to DevOps UK to London, I actually added another slide. So let's see if it works. But let's start with something. Who knows this guy? One hand. 2 hands? Who has read these books? Interesting. And who has read these books and is younger than 40 years old? Okay. So the guy is called Rod Johnson. He's actually to me, is one of the giants of Java world. He's the creator of Spring Framework. And I put there for 3 reasons. First of all, this is the 30th birthday of Java. And I really wanted to have something nostalgia there. So this is where I fall in love in Java. That's the first one. Second, the guy actually wrote a trilogy. The first book that he wrote was J2E Design and Development. He wrote the book in 2002, and he talked about everything in the Java world on how you can create a kick-ass web development framework. In 2004, he wrote the second book, J2E Development Without EJB, and for young guys who are here, EJB Enterprise Java Beans, and also a Struts framework was back then in 2000, between 2000 and 2007, like the most well-known web framework that you have in Java. And then in 2005, he wrote the Java development with the Spring framework, with the whole idea of the Spring framework. And when I read these books when I was 20. So that gives you how old I am. That's the first part. And the second thing is that when I read this book, and I read them, I think, in 1 week, all 3 of them, I was thinking that what was the journey of the Rod Johnson? In the first one, he actually tried to define what is the best web development framework back then that you can achieve. In the second one, he tried to tell you how not to do it. And in the third one, he told you, basically, he told us how to do it, because 20 years later, we are still using his masterpiece. I never met the guy again, but he's giving a talk at the Kotlin conference this year, so maybe I go there. But anyway, before I compare myself to one of the biggest names of the Java world, let's see who I am. So my name is Makan Sepehrifar, and I'm a principal engineer at Code Nomads, a consultancy firm in Netherlands. I work also as a solution architect in Rabobank, 3 or 4 different teams. And as you can see, I have 20 plus years of software development experience. But still being a solution architect and still being a developer, there was 2 topics that always was in my mind. First, software architecture and also software development as a socio-technical concept. It's not about the technical side only, it's also about the social side of the software development. And the second one was the cognitive science and artificial intelligence. And this is the talk that I will try to combine those 2 and give you an idea of why we can fall in love with something. And I told you, Rod Johnson also shared a trilogy. This is my trilogy. In 2022, Roy Brum, who was supposed to be in this stage with me, but he couldn't make it, gave the talk, Happy Developers Write Better Code. And he tried to define all of the elements and aspects of a happiness inside the developer experience. In 2024, Last year, me and my colleague Surush Khodami actually gave the talk, Developer Experience from Hype to Reality. And I remember after giving that talk, I was in a restaurant with Roy and Surush, and I told them that I'm not satisfied with the talk. And when Surush asked me why, I said, we come up with everything on how not to do it, but we never told our audience how to actually implement the developer experience. That's why I came up with the third talk, Falling in Love with Platform Engineering the CUPID way. And this is the whole thing that starts. So I'm going to talk about big organizations. So if you are an organization between 1 people to maybe 500 people, lots of the things that I'm saying may not apply to you. But if you are working in a maybe 2,000 developers organization, then you can see a lot of things that I'm saying. So first of all, what we are talking about when we talk about developer experience. And the whole idea is that there's usually some kind of platform engineering team, developer experience team in the big organizations that take care of infrastructure development, all of those scaffolders for the development environment, and things like that. And to actually make sure that those teams exist, all of the teams have a vision statement. And the vision statements of all of those teams, nearly all of those teams, involves the word happiness. It's about happy developers, make developers happy again, make developers happier. But the thing is that as long as happiness is a very, very nice vision statement, you cannot actually work on it. So what they end up with in their mission statement is usually some aspect of productivity. And that's the first time that you actually go into a dilemma. What's the meaning of the productivity? There are 2 different meanings of productivity, at least 2, that I have seen. The first one, same developer with the same set of expertise will develop an output faster or more output. The second one is that same developer with the same set of expertise will develop the same output but with more quality. But again, that's not something that you can sell to the business. So at the end, you need to have some goals. And that's when you usually come up with some set of measurable insights. Still, it's not measurable easily. So they always go for something like engagements, satisfaction, bringing more value to the production environment, saving of the hours, things like that, basically. And this is actually a very, very inherent complexity. Because what we are dealing with is that they end up with some kind of a standardization on the organization. And boy, oh boy, organizations love a standardization. It's all about money, it's all about the budget, and a standardization usually lower the cost. But when we are dealing with the standardization, there are different aspects that can make it more complex. First of all, we are dealing with human factor. Different persona of developers that needs different kind of experience. Cognitive load of those developers. The other one is that we have diverse teams with diverse tech stacks, diverse needs, diverse tools, how we can standardize all of this. The second one is that the environment around us is also changing. And this is the part that I will tell you how it actually changed from December to February. And finally, we have organizational constraints. Apart from budget and timing constraints, we also have all of those constraints about compliance, security, and also the resistance of developers to the change. If you are working in a big organization that has more than 20 years or 30 years of history, there's usually somebody there that has already worked for 20 years. It doesn't want to change. Surprisingly, the answer of all of these big organizations to a very complex problem that cannot be standardized is one thing: internal developer portals. So they come up with something that they call internal developer portals. And the idea is that let's integrate all of those things together. That's the deployment environment, the observability standards, your security best practices, even the documentation template, even your support and operation. Let's just integrate everything into one place so that people try to understand everything. And with this seamless integration, the idea is that the productivity will boost. The next step is that I need to have some sort of a standardization on the service providing in this internal developer portal. And if you search for developer experience best principles, you are going to probably come up with a list of 30 different items. These are the top ones that actually I have heard in a lot of organizations. Being single source of truth, being self-service by default, by design, or having the maximum self-service to the max, and golden paths instead of guardrails. And if you are wondering what is this one, the whole idea is that as a service provider, you need to actually come up with a service delivery that gives the engineers or the developers what they want, instead of telling them what not to do. The same thing that me and my colleague did 1 year ago. The rest, I'm not going to go through. But there's a problem. I go through all of this. I create a very nice internal developer portals. I onboard all of my service deliveries inside my organization. As a developer, I come to Monday to the work. I want to provision some new cloud infrastructure. I go to my internal developer portal. I create and submit a form. And I submit the form. And I wait. And I wait. There's some automation probably taking over. I'm not really, really sure that it's already automated. But I'm actually waiting for that to happen. So if you are talking about productivity, this is not productivity. If you are talking about happiness, it may be happiness. I'm not super sure. But if you are talking about delivering something faster to the production, this is not it. And what was wrong, basically, with that one? The whole idea is that when these service providers were going to deliver their services in their internal developer portals, what they actually ended up with is implementation of the process, not implementation of the capability. To give you an idea, there was something in there, self-service to the max, which actually makes you some kind of automated stuff. And the whole idea is that if I want to automate something, why I need user input on my form? Why I did not provide all of those functionalities in a way that they can be automated inside the infrastructure as a code pipeline? And that's the whole thing that I was thinking in DevOps Belgium 2024. So this is what I call, and this is how I will tell you what to implement, actually. This is what I call outcome-driven developer experience. So instead of telling you how to do it, or how to implement your developer experience, I'm going to define what is the optimum developer experience, how you can achieve that optimum one, and why you want to achieve that one. In 2022, Mr. Daniel North, who I'm going to quote a lot, gave a talk, What's Wrong with Solid and Test-Driven Development. And basically, he talked about everything that is wrong with Solid. And yet, still, if you go to an interview, probably somebody will ask you, what is the definition of the Solid? I have nothing against Solid. It's a very, very nice set of principles by Bob Martin. And at the same time, I'm thinking that Daniel North has a good idea about the things. So he introduced something called properties over principles. So instead of talking about principles of development, let's talk about the properties of what you are producing. And the whole idea is that let's start and understand the why and the what part. Do not jump to the how part. The second one was that context actually matters. If I give you a principle, your understanding of that principle is different from my understanding of that principle. Why? Because your context is different from my context. The second one was that the properties actually describe the outcomes. And when I'm talking about the code development, the software development, I'm talking about usage of that software or that piece of code inside another code. So the properties of your code is more important to me on how you actually have write all of those codes, basically. And it's about pragmatism over basically dream. Principles always dream about a very nice ideal case that it's there and all of these principles got a check. Properties is more about, hey, I may not be there, I am learning how to get there, and I'm not enforcing everything. And with not enforcing everything, it comes about balancing competing concerns. And if you are interested in the talk that me and Surush gave in 2024 in DevOps Belgium, we actually talked that the optimum developer experience lies somewhere in the balance between the expectation of the developers and the expectation of the business. It's not only about the developers. You cannot achieve the optimum developer experience with just talking and interviewing to the developers. That's not how it works in big organizations. So he came up with an acronym, CUPID. And it stands for composable, Unix philosophy, predictable, idiomatic, and domain-based. And what that means, oh, sorry, you wanted to take a picture? If you search CUPID, you're gonna get there. So what's Daniel North's idea of composable? He's talking about a small surface area. I want to have a piece of code that has exposed only the thing that is necessary to expose. I'm not exposing something else. I'm not exposing my internal implementation detail. I'm not even exposing even my concerns, my dependencies, nothing. Just how you can use it. The second one, it means that it should be intention revealing. Just by looking at your, I'm gonna say, signature of the method or signature of the code, I should be able to know what you want to achieve with that code. I should never be required to go to the details of the implementation. It should have minimal dependencies. Why minimal dependencies? Because if I want to compose your code, basically in my code, I should not also compose all of your dependencies. And the second one is that, and the last one is that it should work well with the others. That's the whole idea of this one. The second one is the Unix philosophy. And for younger generation of the developers, the whole idea of the Unix philosophy is that let's build something that does something small, but do it very good. And the whole idea of Unix philosophy is that it should have a simple, consistent model. If you have worked with Linux or Unix, usually GNU or shell tools, everything that you get from something, you can pipe it to something else. And that's how the consistent model of the input and output works. The next part is that it should be about single purpose. It should not be about single responsibility. When you are talking about single responsibility, you have an eye on the future about the changes. But what Daniel North is mentioning is that it's not about how the code will actually change. It's about how the code you are producing so that it can be used at this point in time. It's also about the clear boundaries, meaning that if I do, for example, let's go for something from the Unix world. If I do an ls, I know that it lists the files in the directory. And it has a very clear boundary. It doesn't like execute something for you. It just lists the directories. It lists the files and directories. And it should have a human perspective. And that's what I really like about the whole idea of Unix philosophy. It's not, again, how you write the code. It's not, again, how you maintain the code. It's not about how you actually document the code. It's not about any of that. Unix philosophy is only about how can I, as a consumer, use it. The next one is the P, the predictable. So the predictable part is really, I think, self-describing. It means that, hey, your output should be consistent and reliable. That's the first part. The second one is that it should have a very deterministic behavior. And if you want to bring this one to an extreme, you can go for idempotency behavior, meaning that if I call your code twice, it should produce the same output if I give you the same inputs. That's the meaning of idempotency. So it's talking about your code should be predictable. Your code should have a deterministic behavior. Even if there is some sense of undeterminism or randomness inside your code, it should be exposed from your code so that they know that, hey, there is some points of non-determinism there. And should have observable properties, the same thing that I told you about non-determinism. It should, meaning that, for example, if I provide the code and I know that, hey, on 90% of the time it actually gives you a success rate, and 10% it doesn't. It's not observable unless I tell you on which conditions it will actually fail. So that's the meaning of observable properties. And it should be idiomatic. And we are getting to the I and nextly to the D. So first of all, it should feel natural. And we know that's like very, very famous sentence that there's only two difficult things in the world of software development: naming things and also cache eviction. So I know it's very difficult to actually feel natural, but at the same time, it's also about language and community standard. So if you have a community chapter or guild inside your organization, don't try to invent new concepts. Try to use something that's already been accepted by that community. And it should follow the established patterns, meaning that if all of the organization uses Spring in the same directory structure, you should use the same directory structure unless you have a very good meaning, very good reasoning upon that. And if you have a good reasoning, instead of changing something and go for your own way of convention, bring it to the community. And finally, it reduced the learning overhead. Why? I'm using their code, I'm consuming your code, and at the same time, I had no onboarding and no learning. Why? Because everything came up from the community. Everything came up from my previous knowledge. And finally, the domain-based. The first one is about problem and solution alignment. So what Daniel North was mentioning in one of his talks is that if I ask you for something that lists the, I don't know, files and directories, don't try to invent something so generic that lists all of the files and directories in the whole galaxy. No, I'm just was talking about this specific folder. Don't try to do something like that. That's why he's saying that when you are writing a code, when you are exposing something, it should have that alignment between what was expected and what it does. It should use the domain language, and it should have the structural alignment. The structural alignment means that if I go to your code, and if I'm looking for the code who's responsible for sending an email, without searching, without using the search, I should be able to go through your directory structure and find which component is responsible. And the last one is about minimal cognitive distance. This is a little bit tricky. It's actually minimal cognitive distance from business value or business feature, meaning that if I go a little bit more abstract, and I want to know that which part of the code is responsible, for example, for saving something in, I don't know, a customer profile. Again, I should be able to find that, meaning that I should be able to trace back the features of the business to your code, basically, or the modules of the code. But it actually changes something very, very important. From the provider to the consumer perspective, it's no longer about how you write your code. Even if you write a very, very nice code with all of those solid principles, and I cannot use it, that means that your code is not good. So it shifts the importance of the features or from the provider principles to the consumer properties. And this is something that actually goes very nice with the platform engineering, with all of those internal developer portals. It's not about how those service delivery teams are providing their services. It's about how I can use it. It's about me as a developer. If I go to that internal developer portal, can I use your service? Does it actually do what I needed? And it's a human-centric approach. It's not about actually user-centric approach. It's more about human-centric approach. Every person that joins the company without the onboarding should be able to use it. That's what we are aiming for. Is it possible? Sometimes not, because there's a lot of glossary that are related to that big organization. And it has interrelated benefits. If I validate the properties as the provider delivery, I can make sure that your delivery as a service provider is good enough. It's not about principles, because principles are very difficult to validate. But properties are easier. I'm not going to say very easy. And you can also measure the outcome. If I'm talking about the productivity, let me give you an idea. One of the things that are being measured in a lot of big organizations about internal developer portals is the adoption of that internal developer portal inside the organization. How they are going to manage, how they are going to actually measure it with the amount of the visits that that internal developer portal has. To me, if I want to have an optimum developer experience, that metric should be 0. So it's not, and that's why I'm saying it's about measuring the outcome, because the outcome was productivity. So if I wanted a developer to be super productive, I should never be needed to actually go to your internal developer portal. And that's why I'm saying it's about the consumer model. It's not about provider model. It's not about establishing an internal developer portal. It's about why we are actually creating an internal developer portal. And why we wanted to create an internal developer portal? To have the seamless integration to boost the productivity. So let's actually measure the productivity. And how the productivity can be measured through an outcome. Just to give you an idea, you are searching for something in your internal developer portal. You click on something, you get an action. At the end, Are you satisfied with that action? And if you do all of this flow, I know that the outcome has been reached. If you sometimes inside that flow, after searching, doing the click on the first one, you go back and click on the second one, I know that the outcome was not reached. As simple as that. A very simple flow from awareness to the action. That's what I want on the outcome side. And also, that's exactly what Daniel Knows was mentioning. It's about what it feels to work with your code. It's about what it feels to work with your internal developer portal. It's never about the abstraction of an abstract description of the code. And I think the similarities is getting more and more and more on applying these principles to the coding and to software development, and how you can apply it to the platform engineering. So let's go for what I call platform engineering the CUPID way. So what I'm aiming for is that, first of all, the standardizations that the organizations like, it should never be about limiting the options. They should never tell you that, hey, we do not support virtual machines, you should only use container instances. No, that's not the idea. The other one is that it's not about enforcing a way of working. I cannot tell you that, hey, all of the organization should do a sprints of 2 weeks. That's not how it works. This is not the level of the standardization that will actually boost the productivity. It has nothing to do with anything. The only thing that it will actually does is makes the management of these things easier. So we are going for like easy management. We are not going for boost of the productivity. What I have in a standardization in mind is a unification of service delivery in a composable, single-purpose, deterministic, and natural feeling offering. Why? Because I want to increase the findability of all of those things and also the structural alignment. So this is what I call the properties of a very nice, I'm going to say, internal developer portals. But can we actually go one step further? So I talked about this a lot. And I came up with this idea that it should be called foundation tiles instead of golden bricks. Golden paths. So instead of saying that, hey, you are here, there's a service delivery that will bring you out of the door, I'm going to give you something that I call it foundation tiles. And the first time that I was talking about this one, somebody came up with the idea that it should be called golden bricks. And I don't like that idea because, again, golden bricks tells you that there's only one way of doing that small thing. No, that's not the case that I want. It's about the tiles that the building blocks instead of the bundled services. That has the enhanced the composability. And also bring the co-creation opportunity. If I'm using 2 different, for example, Git repositories. This is a very, very weird case, I know that. And if I'm using, for example, both GitHub and GitLab at the same time, and I'm using 2 different teams are responsible for that one. Me as a developer can choose between those 2. That's the enhanced composability. Not only that, but also I can compose it and also combine it with how the pipelines are managed. So I can use GitHub Actions or GitLab pipelines. And then tell you that I have created a new service that is composed of the first repository management, second pipeline management. The next one is that it actually improves the maintainability because the smaller those tiles, the lower amount of the effort is needed to maintain that. It goes aligned with the Unix philosophy. And also goes with the gradual adoption. We talked about the change resistance inside the company. And it's very, very difficult to tell an organization with 10,000 developers that, hey, from tomorrow, your way of working is not valid. Please use this way of working. You cannot even say that from next year. Maybe sometimes you cannot say in 10 years you can do that. Decommissioning legacy products in big organizations is a very big achievement. If you have ever achieved that one, be proud of yourself. But it actually empowers the gradual adoption. Why? Because it means that I can just substitute part of my way of working with something else. Part by part, I'm adopting to the new way of working, to the new way of dealing with the platform engineering. And it also empowers the implementation flexibility, meaning that if at 2000 25, I'm using, for example, check marks. And if I want to substitute it with something like SonarQube or something like that, those are not comparable. I know that. But you can easily do it again, because it also brings you about the implementation flexibility. And finally, it's an evolutionary design. It means that I'm learning the same way that the users are learning. I'm giving the service delivery. If it's getting used, I'm getting the feedback that it's being used. If it's not being used, I can substitute it with something else. So I don't end up with a process that's going to be there for a very, very long time. And once I was using this sentence, that's changing the process in a big organization is like changing the path of a river with a teaspoon. Usually it takes a lot of time, even more time than creating a dam or dike from the scratch. And also, while you are doing it, there's always a crowd out there that always shouts, "We just wanted a bridge." And that's the whole idea of changing the process. You are trying to changing something that is impossible because it has a lot of whys behind it, and at the same time, your users are not satisfied even with what you are building. So if I want to go even one step further, what is the ultimate form of composable automation? My first hunch is, let's ditch the internal developer portal. I actually don't need the internal developer portal. What I want is an API catalog that is searchable. It has granular API designed. And actually, they are designed around platform engineering capabilities. So I'm not implementing the process. I'm actually implementing the platform engineering capabilities, like creating, provisioning an infrastructure, going for those security principles. The second thing is that if you're going for a searchable API catalog, you have one way of doing the documentation, one very nice way of doing the documentation. Go for the Open API specification. Don't reinvent the wheels. Don't reinvent your own documentation format. And the next part that only is needed, that it should be actually traceable back to the publisher, so that I could be able to find who has published this in my searchable API catalog, try to get support in those cases. One step further. Now I'm the consumer. Instead of calling even the API, I'm going to compose it in my own automation pipeline. If the automation was the goal, do not encourage manual, I'm going to say, interaction. Just go for the automation. And this way, you provide the governance to the providers. You still empower those providers to be in control of what they are exposing. But the thing is that after that, from the consumer perspective, I have the autonomy in usage. I don't need to actually just go for this one if there is an alternative. I can choose. I can choose it at any time, at any stage in my own pipeline. Not only I can do that, but also I can even publish my own pipeline or share my own pipeline inside the community so somebody else can also use it. And this is what I call the ultimate form of composable automation. And then it leaves a couple of things for the standardization opportunities. First of all, we still need the glossary and domain language. Why? Because all of those API in our API catalog are going to be defined around this glossary. It's still needed. It can be very near the accepted glossary of all of the developers. The closer, the better. And at the same time, it gives me at least 5 different points of standardization. And I think when I was creating this slide, I had 8, and I removed those 8s. And I can talk after this talk about why. But anyway, the authentication and authorization of those APIs that we are providing can still be standardized in a way that, as a consumer, I do not have to deal with multiple authentication and authorization. The observability and monitoring can also be standardized. The feedback gathering can be also standardized. The way of the error handling can also be standardized. This is something that we try to cover in the consistent model of the input and output. And the service firing method or the service execution method can also be standardized in a way that, hey, if I go to the, for example, my API catalog, this is how I can execute the API. And this should be our very, very abstract architecture. The user goes through my API catalog, gets a search the API, list a set of available APIs, provide with the description, endpoint, and Swagger a specification, and calls the API, or integrates it in my pipeline automation. Clean, simple, and easy. But the question was, can I still bring it a little bit forward? And if you remember from the start of this talk, I started from 20 years ago. And I think this is 2024. But this is 2025. This is actually end of 2024. We haven't still came to the 2025. So what else I can do? There was one part about searching and method execution that can also be done more autonomously. How? Using the generative AI agents. And if you are not familiar with those generative AI agents, I'm going to talk a little bit about it in very abstract, but it's very, very easy to implement something like that in the Spring AI, for example. Just do a research on that one. But what agents does is usually a tool. What we call a tool is something that is usually a function API call, and the parameters of that function can be deduced from your natural language using a large language model. So basically, I'm using a large language model to select a tool or an API based on your conversation, deduce all of those parameters from your natural language, calls the API, brings you the result. That's what an agent plus a tool actually does. So what we actually does is that API provider still registers their own API catalog. We have API 1, API 2, API 3. Now the user describes the action and the input. So it can be something like that. Please create a GitHub repository called Devoxx Test UK. There's an API orchestrator that actually searches the API catalog. Is there an API that can create a GitHub repository for me? Yes, there's an API. What does it need? It needs a repository name. Do we have a repository name in the prompt of the user? Yes, there is something called Devoxx UK test. Let's call the API with the parameters of the Devoxx user test, confirm the API input, and get it done. So this is the easy part that you can use a generative AI and actually do it. And generative AI and large language models are very, very good at this part. But know that we are not using them for any kind of reasoning, planning, or something like that. We are still using only the part that's only about understanding the natural language. So this is how it works. This is what we call an agent processing loop. We have an agent application, and the agent application always checks the function result. So it starts with something from the large language model. Hey, based on this input, can you actually give me what is the next action that should be done? Gets the next action from that one. Based on that action, calls the API of the, sorry, there should be a call here, calls the API of the function that's calling, get the function result, checks if the function or the result has been achieved, yes or no. If the result has been achieved, then exists a function. If the result has not been achieved, does this loop once again. Very easy. This is the code that actually will look like. For creation of a GitHub repository, it's actually code of a Spring AI. I'm creating a tool, and I'm describing this is create a new repository with the specified parameters. I'm getting 4 parameters. The name, the description, is it a private, and do I need to initialize it with a README? And I'm using GitHub SDK for creation of the actually repository, and that's it, and I return the result. So this is the tool that I'm using. Providing this as an API is just putting a REST controller at sign above it. And then you have your own API. But is this the end? Not really. If the Devoxx UK was in December or even in January, this was that. But something happened between the January 2025 and February 2025. Anthropic came up with the idea of model context protocols. So what is a model context protocol? Before I go into this one, let me actually tell you what was the problem. We have an integration complexity. Having all of those service APIs, it's very difficult to integrate with all of them. There's a lot of inputs. There's a lot of REST interfaces. How we can standardize all of those? And the model context protocol came up with the problem that first, let's share the context. Those APIs can share the context with each other. We are talking about GitHub repository, so the next call is going to be about the repository. And it also solves the problem of fragmented context access. So it gives you a standard way of calling all of those APIs based on JSON RPC version 2. And to me, MCP will revolutionize AI the same way that the REST changed the internet. Before REST, there was no standard way of calling the APIs. But I think MCP will do the same thing in revolutionizing the way that we work with. So this will be our new flow, basically. The service provider does the same thing, but registers the MCP. And now the whole idea is that my MCP server, as a service provider, I am responsible for that one. So I have not only the single purpose, but also the single responsibility here, and my own controller environment. And then there is an MCP-enabled assistant that does the lookup in the MCP registry. There's an MCP client that calls the API, gets the API, and brings it back. And what's the difference is basically these MCP clients that standardize the way that they are working with each other. So from provider perspective, I don't even need to have my API specification anymore. It's only about description and also my MCP registry. And this is the code that actually GitHub has proposed for this one, and this is in Go, unfortunately. I could share my own code here, but I thought that, OK, let's go for actually a code that has been released. And I have 9 minutes. I'm not sure, live demo or recorded demo? Either I'm very lucky or very unlucky. Let's do it. This is Cloud Desktop, and as you can see here, I have 4 different MCPs currently registered. One for talking with the GitHub. This is the number of the services that they provide. One for working with my file system. The other one for working with the core concepts of the AWS. And the last one for generation of the documentation from AWS. I have a prompt that actually I can use. And let's see. I hope it works. So the repository creation has been done. You are going to see the results later. The Spring Boot with the Hello World REST interface. You can see the result here, by the way. The Spring Maven. This is the actual application. This is the Hello World controller. This is the actuator endpoints. The tests. Let's go on. I asked for a Docker file instead because I wanted to do the deployment through the ECS, Elastic Container Services. So this is the Docker file. Seven minutes. Let's hope that it works because I have 1 or more 2 slides. It's very internet consuming, by the way. I'm doing multiple calls now with the... OK, let's see the result after what. Because I think it couldn't push something because of the internet. So this is my Docker support that has been pushed. I hope it also creates the GitHub action. The documentation of the AWS ECS. Let's create an ACR repository as well. By the way, there are multiple calls to AWS and GitHub at this point, and a lot of calls to the large language model of the cloud here. So the response has been generated. Let's check my repository. So I hope there's one. So this is the structure that has been created. Let's check if the actions has been created as well. And I think it should fail. OK, it was the failed one. Actually, they couldn't do that. But it will create the actions if that wasn't fail. And if I check, for example, for the resource, so let's go. I asked for a hello world controller, if I'm not mistaken. And this is my hello world controller. Are you impressed so far? OK, so this is what I call the future of developer experience. And this is the last slide that I added before jumping on the train and coming to London. And there's something wrong with that, with something that I'm saying. I'm actually contradicting myself somewhere. Does anybody have any idea? Security is not the problem that you can see here. It's another problem. All of those MCPs has some kind of basically MCP problems, security problems. Because you are giving them some kind of personal access tokens usually. But that's why, for example, I cannot share or show my configuration of how I embedded all of those MCPs because it has all of those personal access tokens. But security is not what I try to suggest here and I contradict it. There is something that I suggested in those gonna say properties, and I actually contradicted that one. That's one part. That's why I mentioned that this is actually future. But to bring it a little bit here, I said one of those CUPID items is predictable. So it's going for a deterministic approach. And what I showed you is one step above that, because I actually went for a non-determinism of the, for example, all of the actions. And I configured myself with the setup that I have with the temperature 0 to get like a consistent generation of everything. But still I'm saying, not do that one, the POC that I did. You can play with a lot of these things. But even without using all of those things, all of those code generation, when it comes to the platform engineering, you have a very, very good setup to do. And that's what I call the future of the platform engineering. And that's how I fell in love with the platform engineering. And the last part is that we talked about standardization. We talked about this composability. We talked about the natural language interface. We talked about the self-documenting, about the progressive autonomy, and also about the reduced context switching. Because now you have Cloud, Cursor, IntelliJ, GitHub Code, and also Goose that also provides all of those MCPs. AWS, I know, released their MCPs 2 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. That's the setup that you are seeing. Azure released 1 or 2 weeks ago, and they are still releasing. Google does not have an official MCP release. They are working on that one. 6 days ago, Atlassian also provided those things. I think GitHub was the one that I'm missing here, by the way. Sorry. GitHub. Sorry, Microsoft guys. GitHub released one of the first official MCP ones. And that's it. If you are interested, there's a new hype also coming. The environment is changing. There's a new set of MCP stores or MCP registries that are coming. There's a lot of open source projects that handle all of those MCP registries. Google came up with something called A2A, or agent-to-agent communication, very similar to MCP, but in a different manner. And I mentioned all of those cloud providers are also releasing their MCP servers. And I have 2 questions, 2 minutes. I can get 1 question, but please provide me feedback if you can. Any question? Either my talk was very convincing or not convincing at all. But thank you all.